I never really liked moving. It always felt like leaving a part of myself behind. But after my breakup, I needed somewhere cheap, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could think. That's how I ended up on Redwood Street, in a crooked little house that smelled faintly of mothballs and rainwater. The landlord was an older woman, kind but rushed, as if she wanted me to sign the papers and get out before I asked too many questions. I remember when I asked her about the neighborhood, her lips pressed tight. "It's quiet here," she said. "People keep to themselves." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Don't bother about the house next door. It's been empty for a long time." I thought nothing of it. Empty house, quiet street, cheap rent. It sounded perfect. For the first week it was. I unpacked boxes, set up my bed, got used to the creaks in the floor and the way the wind whistled through the loose window frames. At night, I'd sit on the porch with a beer and listen to the cicadas. The house next door was dark, its windows blank, its garden overgrown. Just another forgotten home until the footsteps started. The first time I heard them, I was half asleep. Heavy, deliberate thuds pacing across the wooden floorboards of the house next door, back and forth, like someone circling a room. I jolted upright, heart hammering, but then it stopped. I told myself it was raccoons, or maybe the wind rattling something loose inside. Old houses make noise. That's what I kept repeating. The next night it happened again, only louder. The unmistakable rhythm of footsteps pacing across the upstairs floor. Back and forth, stop, turn, repeat. I got out of bed and went to the window. The house next door was dark. No lights, no signs of life, but the sounds didn't stop. By the third night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stood outside on my porch staring at that house. No car in the driveway, no movement inside, yet the footsteps echoed clear as day. That was when I noticed something else. Every time I looked directly at one of the upstairs windows, the pacing would pause, as if someone was standing there watching me through the glass. I didn't sleep that night. The landlord laughed when I told her. Empty houses settle. Wood expands, contracts, makes all sorts of noises. Don't spook yourself. But I wasn't spooking myself. I knew what footsteps sounded like. I'd lived in enough apartments to know the difference between a building shifting and someone walking just on the other side of a wall. 2 weeks in, I started documenting it. Times, patterns, everything. Midnight, 2 a.m., 4:17 a.m., always in the dead of night. Sometimes slow pacing, sometimes running, sometimes a dragging shuffle that scraped against the floorboards. Once I even heard laughter. Faint, muffled, like a child giggling in the walls. That broke me. I called the police. They came, banged on the door, circled the house with flashlights. Nobody answered. Looks abandoned to me, the officer said. But the very next night, the pacing returned, louder than ever. I bought heavier curtains, tried to block the windows, but it didn't help. I could still hear it, footsteps moving from room to room, sometimes stopping right at the wall between our houses, as though leaning close to listen. One night, out of sheer desperation, I shouted, "Who's in there?" The pacing stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. For a moment, I thought I'd scared it off. Then slowly, deliberately, I heard the sound of someone knocking back. 3 sharp knocks against the wall right beside my bedroom. I barely slept for days after that. By the end of the month, I was unraveling. My coworkers noticed the bags under my eyes, the way I jumped at every sound. Coffee didn't help. Alcohol didn't help. I started dreading the nights, knowing I'd hear the endless footsteps again. That's when the doorbell rang. It was a Wednesday night, 3 a.m. I nearly fell out of bed when the chime echoed through the house. Heart pounding, I crept to the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing, but the footsteps next door were gone. I waited, holding my breath, hand frozen on the knob. After a long moment, I heard it, a slow creak on my porch, followed by 3 knocks. Not on my door. On the wall of the house next door. I lost it. I screamed, slammed the lights on, called the landlord. She didn't answer. I called again, left a frantic voicemail. The next morning, she came by. "You're imagining things," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make me doubt her. I begged her to tell me what was going on with that house. Why it was empty. Why no one ever went inside. Her face paled. She glanced toward it, then back at me. "Just ignore it," she whispered. "That's all you can do." But I couldn't. That night, I snapped. I waited until the pacing started, midnight sharp, footsteps marching across the upstairs floor. I grabbed a flashlight, stormed across the yard, and forced the back door open with a crowbar. The stench hit me first. Mold, rot, something sour and old. The air was thick, heavy, as though no one had breathed it in years. My light flickered across broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, dust thick enough to choke on. But the footsteps continued. Upstairs. I climbed the staircase, each step groaning beneath me. My flashlight beam trembled across the walls, catching glimpses of torn curtains, cracked picture frames, rooms filled with debris. At the end of the hallway, I saw it, a door, slightly ajar. The footsteps came from inside. My throat tightened. I pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the floor. The wooden boards were worn down in two perfect paths back and forth, as if someone had been pacing there for decades. But no one was there. My light flickered, and in that split second, I saw something, a reflection in the window. Not mine. A man stood behind me, tall, featureless, his head bent at an unnatural angle. I spun around. Nothing. When I turned back, the reflection was still there. Only closer. I bolted, ran down the stairs, out the door, back into my own house. I locked every window, every door, shoved furniture against them, but that didn't stop it. Because now, the footsteps weren't next door anymore. They were in my attic, pacing, relentless, never sleeping. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the knocks again. Not against the wall, not against the door, against the inside of my bedroom ceiling, like someone's waiting to come down. When I first moved into my apartment, the thing I loved most about it was the view. I was on the third floor, overlooking a row of tidy suburban houses across the street. Every morning I'd sit by the window with my coffee, watching people head off to work, kids ride their bikes, neighbors wave to each other like they'd lived there their whole lives. That's how I noticed her, the woman in the house directly across from me. Second floor, right side window. She always sat there, framed by white lace curtains, neat brown hair, pale skin, a cardigan buttoned all the way up even in the heat, and always smiling. Not a little polite smile, but wide, frozen almost, like she was delighted by something only she could see. The first time our eyes met, she waved. I waved back, awkward but polite. That became routine. Every morning when I opened my blinds, she was there. Every evening when I got home from work, still there. Always smiling, always waving. At first I thought it was sweet, harmless. Maybe she was lonely. Maybe watching the world go by from that window was all she had. But after a week, I started to notice things. She never moved, her head didn't tilt, her arms didn't fidget, her body didn't shift in her chair. Just the same rigid posture, the same unblinking gaze, the same smile. One night I stayed up late working. Around 2 a.m. I stretched and glanced outside. She was still there, still smiling. That's when it sank in. She never left the window. I told myself maybe she was bedridden. Maybe the chair was her only spot and the window was her world. It was sad but not sinister. At least that's what I thought until the night she stood up. It was a Sunday. I'd been on my couch all day, binge-watching shows, not paying much attention. Around midnight I glanced out of habit, and she was standing, not moving, not turning, just standing right behind the glass, her face pressed close enough that the smile stretched wider than it should. I froze. It felt like her eyes locked on mine, though I couldn't be sure in the dark. The curtain shifted slightly around her as if from her breath. I snapped my blinds shut. For hours I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe she'd just stretched or someone else was in the room. But the next morning, when I finally dared to open the blinds again, she was back in her chair, smiling, like nothing had happened. I tried to ignore her after that, but it's hard to ignore something that never looks away. Weeks passed. Every day, every night she was there, smiling, waving if I dared meet her gaze. Then strange things started happening in my building. My downstairs neighbor's cat went missing. A delivery guy swore he heard someone whisper his name when he dropped off packages, and twice I came home to find my front door unlocked. Though I knew I'd locked it that morning, I started sleeping with a knife by my bed. Then came the storm. It was late October, the kind of rain that rattles the windows and turns the streets into rivers. Power flickered, and for a moment the world outside was black. When the lights came back on, I made the mistake of looking across the street. Her window was empty. For the first time since I'd moved in, she wasn't there. Relief hit me. sharp and dizzying. Maybe she'd gone to bed. Maybe she'd finally left that damn chair. Then came the knock, 3 sharp raps at my door. I froze, knife clutched in hand. "Who is it?" My voice cracked. Silence. I crept to the peephole. The hallway was empty. I waited, heart pounding, until I finally backed away. That's when I heard it. The creak of floorboards inside my apartment. Behind me, I spun, knife raised. No one. Just shadows stretching across my living room. I barely slept that night. The next morning, her window was occupied again. She was back in her chair, smiling wider than ever. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before: her cardigan. It wasn't the same one she usually wore. This one was darker, torn at the sleeves. And on the fabric, faint but visible, were stains. Brown, rust-colored, blood. I stopped opening my blinds after that. But even with them closed, I could feel her, watching, waiting. I finally broke when the landlord came to collect rent. I asked him about the woman across the street. He frowned. "What woman?" "The one in the window," I said. "Brown hair, cardigan, always smiling. You must have seen her." His face went pale. "That house has been empty for years," he said. "The last tenant—" He stopped himself, but I pushed. Finally, he sighed. "She died in that chair. Alone. They didn't find her for weeks." I laughed, too loud, too desperate. "You're telling me I've been waving at a ghost?" He just shook his head. "Don't look at her. Don't acknowledge her. That's how she keeps coming back." I didn't believe him. Not really, but I wanted to. So I stopped opening the blinds, stopped looking, stopped waving back. For a while, it worked. The noises in my apartment stopped. The strange feelings faded. Life almost felt normal again, until last night. I woke up to a soft creaking. Not outside, not across the street, inside. My blinds were open, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw her. Not in her chair, not in her window. When I was a kid, my parents warned me about sticking my nose where it didn't belong. I wish I had listened. It started when I moved into a quiet rental house at the edge of town. Nothing fancy, 1 story, peeling paint, a patchy yard. But it was cheap, and after a messy breakup, I needed a place of my own. The neighborhood was plain, quiet. Retirees watering lawns, kids riding bikes, the kind of place where people nod but don't really talk. My house sat next to an old property that belonged to a man named Mr. Langley. Langley was the sort of neighbor everyone avoided. Late 60s, wiry frame, deep wrinkles carved into his face like scars. He never waved, never said hello, just watched. Always watched. His yard was a mess, overgrown grass, weeds, and in the back a big rusted shed with a heavy padlock on it. That shed became the center of everything, because at night it made noises. At first I thought it was animals, scraping, banging, sometimes even a low moan that rose and fell like wind through a pipe. But it wasn't wind, it wasn't animals. One night around 2 a.m. I stepped onto my porch for a smoke. That's when I heard it clear as day, a voice muffled, desperate, coming from inside that shed. "Help, please." I froze, cigarette trembling between my fingers. The sound was faint, but it was there. Someone was inside. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was a dream. Stress. Too much drinking. But the following night, it happened again. A cry, a thud. Something or someone scraping against the metal walls of that shed. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next time I saw Langley, he was dragging a large sack across his yard. The thing was heavy, bulging, and it left a dark streak in the dirt behind him. When he noticed me watching, he stopped. His eyes narrowed. And then, he smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile. It wasn't friendly. That night, the noises from the shed were worse, louder, almost frantic. I called the police. They came. Asked a few questions, knocked on Langley's door. He answered, calm as could be. After a while, the officers left. One of them told me it was nothing, just old equipment shifting in the shed. But I knew better. 2 nights later, I crept into my backyard, flashlight in hand, and pressed my ear against the fence. The noises were there, scraping, muffled crying, and then a sharp metallic clang that made my blood run cold. Something was inside, something alive. I should have left it alone. I should have packed up and moved out. But I couldn't. I needed to know. The next weekend, when Langley's truck was gone, I made my move. I hopped the fence, crept through the overgrown grass, and stood before the shed. The padlock was massive, rusted but solid. From inside came a sound that made my stomach twist. Breathing. Slow, ragged breathing. Hello? I whispered. The breathing stopped. Then so faint I almost missed it. Please, help me. It was a woman's voice. I fumbled with the lock, tugged, pulled. It wouldn't budge. My hands shook as I tried to wedge my flashlight into the latch, but it was useless. Then I heard it. The crunch of gravel. Langley's truck pulling back into the driveway. I bolted, barely making it over the fence before his headlights swept across the yard. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept picturing that sack. That voice. That locked shed. The next day, I confronted him. "Mr. Langley," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's in the shed?" His eyes narrowed again. That same unreadable glare. "Tools," he said flatly. "I heard something." I pushed. "A person?" For a long moment, he just stared at me. Then he smiled again. That same awful smile. "You should mind your own business," he said softly. I reported it again. The police came, checked, and left. Same story. Nothing suspicious. But the noises didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. Some nights it sounded like fists pounding against metal. Other nights, low moans that carried through the still air. And once, God help me, I heard laughter. High, broken laughter that rose and fell like someone losing their mind. I started drinking to cope. Started leaving the TV on all night just to drown out the sounds. Then, one night, it stopped. No noises, no cries, just silence. For the first time in weeks, I slept. But the silence didn't last, because a few nights later, I woke to a sound I'll never forget. Not from the shed, from inside my house. Slow, deliberate footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed the knife from my nightstand, hard hammering, and crept toward the sound. The hallway was dark, shadows stretching like claws across the walls. "Hello?" My voice cracked. The footsteps stopped. I flipped the light on. Empty. But when I turned back toward my bedroom, I saw it. On the floor, a trail of muddy prints, leading from my back door toward my room. I locked every window, every door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gotten in. The next morning I went outside. The shed door was wide open. The padlock dangled broken on the ground. Inside it was empty. No tools. No sacks, no signs of life, just scratches. Deep, jagged scratches covering the walls and floor. And a smell. Rot, mold, and something else. Something foul. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. That night I heard the noises again. But not from the shed, from my attic. Scraping, dragging, breathing. I called the police one last time. They searched, found nothing. Said it was probably rats, but I know better. Because last night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again. A voice right above me, whispering through the ceiling, "Help me." And this time, it wasn't a woman's voice, it was Mr. Langley's.